Hi, welcome to Alter Heron. My name is Rob Runacres, and I'm very, very sweaty at the International Rapier Seminar in Copenhagen. And I'm with Thibault. I'm going to try and say his surname because he's already told me. Ghesquière. Okay. I've only known him for about 10 years.
Yeah.
I'm going to talk a little bit about what he's been doing here, and in particular, one of the masters that we both have an interest in. So, Thibault, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks a lot for inviting me here.
I kind of bullied you into it.
Yeah, how many times did you try to do?
Moving swiftly on. Okay, so you've been doing two workshops here.
Yeah, exactly.
And what exactly have you been concentrating on?
Well, Charles Besnard, who was a fencing master in the mid 17th century in the west of France, at the time, had written edited a treatise on fencing and with a single sword. So this is an interesting period of time because, as we were talking before, there is all these changes occurring in the rapier or the swords at the time. Also, first with the physicality of the rapier or the swords changing for lighter or smaller swords, and the guard is changing, but also with the way people were fencing with it. And that's really interesting because we are beginning to see the first changes that will tend towards the beginning and the essence of the small sword in late times.
And I think that's something that's worth concentrating on, because we had a really good chat about this, is that the traditional idea is that you've got something called the side sword, which then turns into the rapier, which then turns into the small sword.
Yeah.
And of course the history is a lot more complicated than that.
Yeah, it is.
Excuse me, we you know, the term side sword is anachronistic for a start, but we won't go into that. What is interesting about Besnard, though, is actually he really is moving from the rapier towards a small sword type form, and you are seeing a lot of the guards and the mechanics that the one would see later in things like, I guess, Labat and Liancourt and all of these guys doing the small sword.
Yes, yeah, exactly. For example, we can see things like parrots with going to parry with your false edge, which is something we didn't see that much before.
You tended to see it, I mean, you certainly see it in the Bolognese system, but in a different way, aren't you? You're actually seeing it in what people would recognise in almost an épée form today, wouldn't they?
Exactly, yeah, absolutely. And also exchanges with the point low and guard high, which is something also that we didn't see that much in linear fencing before. So these are really interesting things for that matter. But also the cards are changing. For example, Charles Besnard says the second is not this is a terza, and your hand low on the outside line, but below and attacking from below is a seconda.
Yeah.
And so this is really strange, and I think that links pretty well with the evolution of the guards later on.
It is, and I think, but mind you, I mean that's something that's also very interesting. Is we tend to apply the modern to the past.
Oh yeah,
and yeah, exactly, and so we take this idea of like a grip and guard so on, and we just go 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's not consistent at all. So. Just tell us a little bit about Besnard's approach in how he lays out his manual, because that as well is quite an interesting format.
Oh, definitely. The treatise is really well organized. The first part is how do you do to construct your fencing when you are attacking your opponent. Now, first, you will take the control of the central line, let's say on the inside or the outside, and then you wait to see what will be direction to your opponent, and then it gives all the responses you have to do depending on what
is it 7, if I remember rightly. He has like there's essentially he says the opponent will react in, I think, 4 ways, and then you've got 7 ways in which you can do it, and it's so concise, isn't it?
It's really exactly like he says, okay, the opponent, you go inside, maybe will try to do a cavachier and an attack, or maybe cavachier do nothing, or maybe try to contrast on the inside and counter your control of the central line, or maybe do step backwards. And from that, it will just devise your action. Like, let's say he goes to a cavachier, then attack, and now he gives also 9 reactions to this particular actions. So it's really detailed, and you more or less all the fencing actions are depicted there.
It is. I mean, it is quite a linear style, of course. Yeah. So again, you're seeing this sort of proto small sword. I think one of the things that I like about it when you read through it, It is. We are doing a translation, but the French is a little bit florid. It's quite. It's from Brittany, and no offense, Jean Briard. And but what it does, where you don't. A lot of the treatises before tend to sometimes be something of a ramble. They'll sort of go along in a course of things, even though a lot of them are very well laid out. Don't get me wrong, but this really seems to be. I hesitate to compare with Distress or anything, but it does seem to be a very succinct. And it always comes back to this. You only have these set things to do. So it's really trying to be concise with it, isn't it?
Well, actually, some of the students of my last workshop were doing the point that some of the way it was organized and also some of the actions we did were quite close to some of radar techniques. So
right.
I don't.
Fantastic.
I don't do the stress.
All right. Radar's 50 years later as well, so that's interesting.
Also,
okay.
So that's interesting. But also, yes, it's very well organized, and like if you compare it to something like Dancy or maybe more the Book of Lessons, it's less like an assembly of good techniques, but happens to be put together. It's really like these techniques go well in this place, and also you can do in this place this technique, etc.
It's a very lucid methodology, isn't it?
Definitely.
I think. Really, just to round off on this. I think we have to mention the last part of Besnard, which isn't often touched on by Hema, and he basically goes off on one, doesn't he?
A bit of a rumbling, right?
Yeah, he's very distressed, but essentially what he's doing is he's complaining about the dueling that's happening in France at the time, 1653. This is post one of the last of the civil wars, certainly under Louis XIV, La Ronde, and he's very concerned about young men who are basically fighting. We're not too sure whether they are actually small swords or whether they are just a short sword or dagger, even, are they?
Yeah,
and pistols at point blank.
But the main thing is the pistol.
Yeah.
I think he's complaining more on the pistol than more on the swords. So I guess we are holding a pistol in their right hand and a small dagger, small sword.
Exactly, but we're talking very, very,
close combat.
And he's very concerned about the loss of skill, isn't he?
Yeah, exactly. He states that the fact that let's say you are a really brilliant fencer, right? And I challenge you, I'm a bad fencer, and I challenge you to a duel. But as I'm afraid of you being a good fencer, I will challenge you to a duel with a pistol. And then I may have 50-50 chance of killing you, even if I'm not skilled at all. So this is a big problem for him, because he says there is no point anymore for the people, the gentlemen, to go to train a lot to get better and try to improve. And
he feels France is under threat, doesn't he?
Yeah,
he actually sees this as a breakdown of society.
And to the king also, he says that the quality of people will get decreased because of that. But interesting, because he has to argue that he is not for the duel because he thinks it's a bad thing. He has to say it's bad, but also says I think the duel with a pistol is much worse than the duel with swords.
And that, we probably don't have time on this, but we don't have time on this episode. But certainly, Pascal Biost et al. In Croix le Fer, if anyone wants to read that, it's quite an old book now, but they actually talk about, I suppose, a hypocrisy or something that fencing leads to dueling. Which, if anyone's interested, there's also the English duel by Peltonen, who talks about this too. I think it's tenuous because that fencing also performed other functions like defence and also fitness as well. It's what the young men would go into in the academies. But
education, I guess.
Exactly. Also, but it is very interesting to see someone who I think is seeing something going out of control. And he's deeply upset to the point of almost being incoherent, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and the way,
and he publishes it as well. This is published in a book.
Also, he does a big thing where he complains, saying, "Oh, this is bad for the king. This is bad for the people." But also, he does another paragraph, another part afterwards with another title, saying, "Where this is the part where I explain why the demon is where
absolutely
gathered and bring this to the people, the pistol dueling." And so this is really like.
Yeah, he does see that there is actually a satanic thing, and again we can scoff at this today, but we have to recognise that this is the end of extremely turbulent period, I suppose, and you've got the Regency going on. So at any rate, Thibault, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts on Charles Besnard.
Thank you very much.
And let's go and do some fencing.
I'm really happy to finally be there. I wanted to be there for so
I've asked
long
him
time.
so many times.
That's great.
No.
Finally, I'm here.
All right.
And I love your YouTube channel.
Okay,
so,
really.
good.
He's always complaining about the sound. All right.
All right.
Okay, cheers.
Cheers.
Bye.
Good.